Hi, my name is Cassidy Brooks, but everyone calls me Cass. Growing up, my parents measured success by square footage and zip codes. My brother Brandon got a down payment for a 4-bedroom colonial in the suburbs. I got a lecture about living within my means when I bought a tiny house on wheels. What they didn't know was that my 400-square-foot home sat on 500 acres of prime Oregon forest land worth more than every property they'd ever owned combined. The day my father walked through my front door, looked around at my compact kitchen and fold-down bed, and said this place is an embarrassment to the Brooks name, I smiled and made a single phone call that would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning my parents showed up unannounced, I was sitting on my porch watching fog roll through the Douglas firs. My tiny house perched on a ridge that caught the first light, and from where I sat with my coffee, I could see miles of forest stretching toward the Cascade foothills. The air smelled like pine sap and damp earth, the kind of clean that makes your lungs feel grateful. I heard the car before I saw it. The engine noise didn't belong here, too smooth, too expensive. A silver Lexus SUV came bouncing up the dirt road, branches scraping its sides. My father would hate that. He waxed that car every Sunday like it was a religious ritual. Richard Brooks stepped out first, brushing invisible dust off his polo shirt. My mother Patricia followed, her heels sinking into the soft ground as she picked her way toward my steps. She was already frowning at the mud on her shoes. Cassidy, my father said, not hello, just my full name like he was disappointed before we'd even started talking. We need to have a conversation about your living situation. I took another sip of coffee. The mug was handmade by a potter in Pinewood Junction, uneven and perfect. Good morning to you too, Dad. He looked past me through the open door of my tiny house. The interior was visible from where he stood. My kitchen counter that doubled as a desk, the loft bed accessible by a ladder, the composting toilet I'd installed myself. His expression shifted from concern to something closer to disgust. This is what you left a perfectly good apartment for? Patricia's voice was tight. Cassidy, this is barely bigger than a garden shed. It's 400 square feet, I said calmly. Everything I need and nothing I don't. Richard climbed the 3 steps to my porch without being invited. He was a tall man, used to filling rooms and dominating conversations. But my porch was small, and suddenly he seemed too big for the space, awkward and out of place. Can we come inside? He asked, though he was already reaching for the door. I stood up, blocking his path gently. It's kind of a one-person space right now. Maybe we could talk out here? His jaw tightened the way it always did when someone told him no. Your mother drove an hour to see you. The least you can do is let her sit down. I stepped aside. They filed in, Patricia's shoulder bag catching on the doorframe. Inside, they stood in the middle of my main room, which was also my kitchen, also my living room, also my office. There was nowhere to stand that didn't feel like you were in the way of something. Where do you even sleep? Patricia touched the ladder leading to my loft with one finger, like it might be contaminated. Up there. The bed folds down. There's storage underneath. She looked at Richard with an expression I knew well. It was the same look she'd given when I'd chosen a state school over the private university Brandon had attended. The look that said I was making choices that reflected poorly on her. Richard walked the length of the space in 4 steps. He peered into my bathroom, barely bigger than an airplane lavatory. He opened my mini fridge and closed it again quickly. This is what you spent your inheritance on? His voice was low, controlled. Your grandfather's money, and this is what you did with it? There it was. The real reason for the visit. My grandfather Walter had died 2 years ago and left me a sum of money in his will. Not a fortune by some standards, but enough to matter. Enough that my parents had opinions about how it should be spent. I used it wisely, I said. Wisely? Patricia's voice went up. Cassidy, your brother used his inheritance as a down payment on a real home. He has equity. He has an address people can respect. You have a trailer. It's not a trailer. It's a tiny house. And it's paid for. No mortgage, no debt. Richard's face was reddening. That's not the point. The point is you're 32 years old living like a college student at a music festival. What are you going to do when you want to start a family? Where are you going to put children? I don't have children, Dad. But when you do, he pushed on, ignoring me. You can't raise kids in this. It's irresponsible. It's short-sighted. I crossed my arms. Did Brandon send you? Patricia's expression flickered. That told me everything. He's concerned about you, she said carefully. We all are. Brandon lived in Heritage Hills, a development full of houses that looked identical except for slight variations in shutter color. His 4-bedroom colonial had granite countertops and a 3-car garage. His wife drove a BMW. His kids went to private school. And apparently, my lifestyle was a personal affront to his sense of family status. You should sell this thing, Richard said, gesturing around like he was swatting flies. Use whatever you can get for it and let us help you find a real place. Somewhere in town, near your brother. Patricia and I would even co-sign if you need help qualifying for a mortgage. The offer landed like a stone. They wanted me in debt and close by where they could supervise my choices. Where my life could be measured against Brandon's and found appropriately wanting. I'm not selling, I said quietly. Cassidy, be reasonable, Patricia started. I am being reasonable. I'm happy here. I have everything I need. Richard's voice hardened. You have nothing here. You're isolated. You're alone. This place is an embarrassment to the Brooks name. The words hung in the air between us. An embarrassment. Not a concern for my well-being or happiness. An embarrassment. Because what would his golf buddies think? What would Patricia tell her book club? I think you should go, I said. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but Richard was already moving toward the door. He paused at the threshold, looking back at me with something that might have been pity if it wasn't so laced with disappointment. When you're ready to grow up and make adult decisions, you know where to find us. They left, the Lexus reversing carefully down the narrow road. I watched until the sound of the engine faded completely, swallowed by the forest. Then I sat back down on my porch, but the morning had lost its peace. The coffee in my mug had gone cold. I poured it out over the railing and watched it disappear into the ferns below. An embarrassment. I'd heard versions of that my whole life. Growing up in the Brooks household meant understanding that love came with conditions and approval had to be earned through the right choices. The right clothes, the right school, the right career, the right partner. Brandon had always been better at playing that game. When I was 10, I'd wanted to join the science club at school. It met on Thursdays after class and cost $15 for the semester. My parents said no. Not because they couldn't afford it, but because Brandon needed new football equipment and there wasn't room in the budget for both. Brandon's activities built character and college applications. Mine were hobbies. When I was 16, I'd saved up for a used car by working weekends at a bookstore. I'd found a reliable Honda with high mileage but good maintenance records. My father had refused to let me buy it. He said it reflected poorly on the family to have an old car in the driveway. Instead, he'd co-signed for Brandon's new pickup truck and told me I could borrow the family sedan when it was available. It was rarely available. When I'd graduated college, I'd wanted to take a year to travel before starting my career. I'd had enough saved, had already planned the route through Southeast Asia. My parents had staged an intervention, telling me I was throwing away opportunities and embarrassing them in front of relatives who expected better. Brandon had gone straight into a corporate job their father had lined up. I'd caved to the pressure and taken a position I hated for 3 years before finally quitting. Every time, I'd bent. Every time, I'd reshaped my choices to fit their expectations. And every time, it had left me feeling smaller, like I was living inside an outline someone else had drawn. But the tiny house was different. The tiny house was mine in a way nothing had ever been before. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Brandon. Mom said you were rude to them. Just sell the shed and be normal for once. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Then I deleted the text without responding and opened my contacts instead. I scrolled to Nina Alvarez and hit call. She answered on the second ring. Tell me you're calling with good news and not Brooks family drama. The latter, I admitted. Nina had been my roommate in college, one of those friendships that forms fast and runs deep. She was the first person who'd ever told me it was okay to want different things than my family wanted for me. She'd been the one to encourage me to quit that soul-crushing corporate job. And she'd been standing right beside me the day I'd signed the papers for this land. Let me guess, she said. They showed up, hated the house, and told you you're wasting your life. Pretty much word for word. I heard her sigh through the phone. Cass, you've got to stop letting them in your head. You know what you've got there. They don't get to make you feel small about it. My father called it an embarrassment to the family name. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. There was a long pause. Then Nina's voice came back, sharper. Where are you right now? On the porch. Stay there. I'm coming over. I'll bring lunch. She hung up before I could argue. That was Nina. She didn't ask if you needed help. She just showed up. I spent the next hour trying to work, but my laptop felt foreign in my hands. I kept thinking about my father's face, the way he'd looked at my home like it was evidence of failure. The way my mother had touched the ladder with her fingertips, recoiling. They hadn't asked me if I was happy. They hadn't asked about my work as a freelance grant writer, which I could do from anywhere with internet. They hadn't noticed the solar panels I'd installed myself or the rainwater collection system that made me almost completely self-sufficient. They hadn't seen the garden I was planning or the trails I'd been clearing through the property. They'd seen 400 square feet and decided it wasn't enough. Not enough space, not enough status, not enough proof that I was living the kind of life they could brag about. Nina's truck appeared around noon, a beat-up Ford Ranger that had seen better decades. She climbed out carrying a paper bag that smelled like the Thai place in town. Okay, she said, settling onto the porch steps beside me. Tell me everything, and don't leave out the judgy faces your mom makes. I told her. The unannounced visit, the comments about the ladder and the bathroom, the comparisons to Brandon's house. The final line about being an embarrassment. Nina was quiet for a moment, unpacking spring rolls. Your family has a gift for finding exactly the wrong thing to say. It's a talent, I agreed. She handed me food, and we ate in silence for a while. The fog had burned off, and the afternoon sun was filtering through the trees in golden columns. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals. Can I ask you something? Nina said finally. Do they know what this land is worth? I shook my head. They think I bought a lot for the tiny house. They don't know about the acreage. Her eyebrows went up. They don't know you own 500 acres? My grandfather's will was specific. The land came to me directly, separate from the monetary inheritance. My parents had been informed by the lawyer, but I don't think they'd paid attention to the details. They'd been focused on the dollar amount I'd received, not the property deed. Cass, this land is worth millions. You know that, right? I know. The Whitmore property, as locals still called it, had been in my grandfather's possession for 40 years. He'd bought it when land was cheap and he was young, intending to build a cabin for weekend retreats. He'd never gotten around to the cabin, but he'd held on to the property, watching its value climb as Oregon's population grew and rural land became scarce. The 500 acres contained old-growth timber worth a fortune on its own. There were 3 natural springs, water rights that developers would kill for. The southern portion bordered Bureau of Land Management territory, which meant protected views and guaranteed privacy. A surveyor I'd hired had found evidence of mineral deposits that might or might not be valuable, but were at least worth investigating. Conservative estimates put the land's value at $4 million. Optimistic estimates went as high as 6 million. And my tiny house, the embarrassing shed my parents had mocked, sat right in the middle of it. So what are you going to do? Nina asked. About what? About them. You know this isn't over. Your parents don't just drop things. And if Brandon's already texting you, that means they're coordinating. She was right. I'd grown up watching my parents operate. When they wanted something, they mounted campaigns. Gentle pressure at first, then increasingly aggressive tactics until you caved just to make it stop. I don't know yet, I admitted. Well, while you figure it out, maybe don't tell them about the acreage. That information feels like ammunition they don't need. We finished lunch, and Nina helped me work on the garden plot I'd been planning. She was good with her hands, better than me, and by the time the sun started dropping toward the hills, we'd framed out beds for vegetables and herbs. You know what I think? Nina said, packing up her tools. I think you should stop hiding out here. I'm not hiding. You kind of are. You bought this amazing property, you built this cool house, and you're keeping it secret like you're ashamed. Meanwhile, your family thinks you're living in poverty in the woods. Maybe it's time they saw what you actually have. The idea made my stomach twist. Showing them felt like inviting judgment on something I wanted to keep sacred. But Nina had a point. As long as they operated on false assumptions, they'd keep pushing. I'll think about it, I said. She gave me a long look. You're going to let them steamroll you again, aren't you? No, I said, but even I could hear the uncertainty in my voice. After Nina left, I sat on the porch as twilight settled over the forest. The temperature dropped, and I went inside to grab a blanket. My tiny house glowed warm in the dusk, light spilling from the windows. From the outside, it probably did look small and insignificant. You couldn't see the value of the land around it. You couldn't see the freedom it represented. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local. I answered cautiously. Is this Cassidy Brooks? A woman's voice, older, familiar in a way I couldn't place. Yes, who's this? This is your Aunt Helen, dear. Your father's sister. I heard about your little house in the woods, and I just wanted to reach out. My stomach dropped. Aunt Helen. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year, maybe longer. She lived in Portland and appeared at family functions to offer unsolicited advice and thinly veiled criticism. I'm just worried about you, honey, she continued. Living all alone out there. It's not safe for a young woman. And I heard the place is quite small. You know, your cousin Troy just bought a lovely condo in Beaverton. Very modern, very secure. I could put you in touch with his realtor if you're interested in finding something more suitable. I'm not interested, Aunt Helen. I'm happy where I am. Well, of course you'd say that, dear. But sometimes we don't know what's best for us until we're shown other options. Your parents are just trying to help. They want to see you settled properly, like Brandon. You understand that, don't you? The script was already in motion. They weren't just concerned. They were recruiting allies, building a consensus that my choices were wrong and needed correction. I appreciate your concern, I said, keeping my voice neutral. But I'm an adult, and I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions. There was a pause. Then Aunt Helen's voice came back cooler. Well, I hope you'll reconsider. Family is important, Cassidy. We're only trying to look out for you. She hung up before I could respond. I set the phone down and stared at it like it might ring again any second. This was how it always started. The concerned calls, the helpful suggestions, the slow building pressure from every side until it felt like the whole family was unified in their disappointment. And at the center of it all would be my father, pulling strings, coordinating messages, making sure everyone delivered the same verdict. I was being unreasonable. I was being stubborn. I needed to listen to people who knew better. The forest outside was dark now, full of sounds I'd learned to identify. Owls hunting, branches settling, the wind moving through the canopy. Inside my tiny house, everything was warm and close and mine. I thought about what Nina had said. Stop hiding. Maybe it was time. But first, I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. I needed to understand what my parents were really after. Because I'd learned a long time ago that with Richard and Patricia Brooks, there was always an angle. Always something they wanted that they weren't saying out loud. I opened my laptop and pulled up the property records I'd been organizing. The deed to the land, the survey maps, the water rights documentation. Everything that proved exactly what I owned. Then I opened a new document and started making notes. Names of everyone who'd contacted me. Phrases they'd used. The timeline of calls and visits. If this was going to become a battle, I wanted records. I wanted proof. The cursor blinked on the screen, waiting. An embarrassment to the Brooks name. We'd see about that. The next morning arrived with a sky so clear it almost hurt to look at. I'd slept badly, waking every few hours to check my phone like I was expecting bad news. By the time dawn broke, I was already dressed and nursing my second cup of coffee when I heard another car approaching. This time it was worse. Not one car but two. My father's Lexus followed by Brandon's pristine white Audi. They parked side by side like they were forming a barricade, and when they got out, I could see they'd coordinated. Both wearing khakis and button-down shirts, both with expressions that said this was an intervention. Brandon reached my porch first. His smile was the practiced one he used in sales meetings, warm on the surface and calculating underneath. Hey sis. Got a minute? Dad and I wanted to talk to you about something important. I stayed in my doorway. I'm kind of in the middle of work. This won't take long, Richard said, climbing the steps. His tone suggested I didn't actually have a choice in the matter. I stepped aside because refusing would have created a scene, and I wasn't ready for that yet. They filed into my space, and immediately it felt crowded. Brandon was looking around with barely concealed judgment, touching things like he was assessing their value. So this is the famous tiny house, Brandon said. Mom described it, but I had to see it for myself. Now you've seen it, I replied evenly. Richard positioned himself in the center of the room, hands in his pockets. Cassidy, your brother, and I have been talking. We're worried about your future. This lifestyle you've chosen, it's not sustainable. I waited. There was always more. Brandon picked up where our father left off. Look, I get it. The whole minimalist thing is trendy right now. But Cass, you're not building equity here. You're not investing in your future. This thing depreciates in value. A real house appreciates. I leaned against my kitchen counter. I'm aware of how real estate works. Are you though? Richard's voice carried that edge I remembered from childhood, the one that suggested my understanding was always somehow lacking. Because if you were, you wouldn't have sunk Grandpa Walter's money into this. You'd have invested it properly. Like you did? The words came out before I could stop them. Richard's face tightened. Your brother made a smart investment. He has a home his family can be proud of. And I don't? Brandon sighed like he was dealing with a difficult child. Nobody's saying that. We're just saying you could do better. You could have more. Don't you want more? I looked at him directly. More of what, exactly? More space. More stability. More of a future. Brandon gestured around the tiny house. What happens when you want to get married? What happens if you meet someone? You can't bring a partner back to this. Why not? Because it's embarrassing, Cass. Richard said it simply, like it was an objective fact. You're a Brooks. We have standards. There it was again. That word. Embarrassing. As if my happiness or comfort was secondary to how my choices reflected on them. Brandon pulled out his phone and started scrolling. Actually, that's part of why we're here. I found a great property listing. 3-bedroom townhouse in Heritage Hills, my development. There's one coming on the market next week, and I have an in with the seller. I could get you a good deal. I'm not interested in Heritage Hills. You haven't even seen the listing, he pressed, turning his phone toward me. It's got a 2-car garage, updated kitchen, and the HOA handles all the exterior maintenance. You wouldn't have to worry about anything. I don't want to live in an HOA. Why not? Brandon's voice rose slightly. Because you'd have to follow rules? Because you'd have to maintain certain standards? Because I like living here, I said firmly. I like waking up to trees instead of neighbors. I like having space to breathe. Richard moved closer. This isn't about what you like right now. This is about what's practical. What's responsible. You're not getting any younger, Cassidy. At some point, you need to think about settling down properly. I am settled. In a shed, Brandon muttered. It's not a shed, I snapped. It's a home. My home. And I didn't ask for your opinions about it. Richard's voice went cold. We're your family. You should want our opinions. The room fell quiet except for the sound of wind in the trees outside. Through my window, I could see a deer moving through the underbrush, graceful and unbothered. I wished I felt that unbothered. Brandon tried a different approach, softening his voice. Look, Cass. We're not trying to gang up on you. We're trying to help. Dad and I have both been successful in real estate. We know what builds wealth and what doesn't. This tiny house thing, it's a money pit. But if you sell it now and invest in actual property, you could still come out ahead. Come out ahead of what? Of this mistake, Richard said bluntly. Before you sink any more money into something that will never give you a return. I felt something shift inside me, a door closing on the part of me that wanted their approval. Who said I was looking for a return? Everyone looks for a return, Brandon said. That's how investing works. Maybe I wasn't investing. Maybe I was just living. Richard shook his head slowly. This is exactly what we're talking about. This kind of thinking, it's not how adults approach financial decisions. I'm 32 years old. I think I qualify as an adult. Then act like one, he shot back. Sell this thing. Buy a real property. Stop embarrassing yourself and your family. The words landed like slaps. I felt my hands curl into fists at my sides, nails digging into palms. Get out. Brandon blinked. What? Get out of my house. Both of you. Now. Cassidy, Richard started. No. I stepped toward the door and opened it. You came here uninvited. You insulted my home. You're treating me like I'm incompetent. I'm done with this conversation. Brandon looked at Richard like he was waiting for direction. Richard stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Disappointment, maybe. Or anger that I wasn't playing along with the script they'd prepared. You're making a mistake, Richard said finally. That's my choice to make. They left, but not before Brandon turned back at the door. The offer stands, Cass. When you're ready to be reasonable, call me. I'll help you find something appropriate. I closed the door the moment he stepped off the porch and stood there breathing hard. My hands were shaking. Through the window, I watched them get in their cars and leave, kicking up dust on the road. When the sound of their engines faded, the silence felt enormous. I sank onto my couch, which was also my guest bed when I pulled it out, and stared at nothing. My phone was on the counter. I picked it up and called Nina again. They came back, I said when she answered. Your parents? And Brandon. Tag team intervention. They want me to sell the tiny house and buy a townhouse in Brandon's development. Of course they do. Nina's voice was tight with anger. Let me guess. They brought listings and everything. Brandon had his phone out, ready to show me properties. I heard Nina moving around, the sound of keys jingling. I'm coming over again. You don't have to keep rescuing me. I'm not rescuing you. I'm bearing witness. There's a difference. Be there in 30. She hung up before I could argue. I sat there holding my phone, feeling the weight of the morning pressing down on me. Part of me wanted to crawl into my loft bed and hide. But another part, the part that had spent years bending to their expectations, was tired of hiding. I opened my laptop and pulled up the property records again. The survey maps showed every acre, every boundary line, every asset. I'd been sitting on this information for 2 years, keeping it close like a secret. But secrets only had power if you were afraid of what happened when they came out. What if I wasn't afraid anymore? The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. What if I stopped letting them define success for me? What if I stopped measuring my choices against Brandon's and just lived? Nina arrived with sandwiches again and a determined expression. Okay, she said, settling onto my porch. We need to make a plan. A plan for what? For handling your family. Because they're not going to stop. You kicked them out today, which was great, but that just means they'll regroup and come at you harder. I know. So what's your move? She bit into her sandwich and waited. I don't have one yet. Then let's make one. She pulled out a notebook, the kind she used for work projects. What are they actually after? I thought about it. Control, I said slowly. They want me to make choices they approve of. Choices that fit their definition of success. Okay, but deeper than that. Why does your tiny house threaten them so much? Because it proves I don't need them. Because it shows I can be happy without following their blueprint. Nina nodded, writing. And because it makes them look bad if you're happy with less. If you don't need the big house and the fancy car, then what does that say about their choices? That they bought things they didn't need to impress people who don't matter. Exactly. She looked up from her notebook. So their strategy is to undermine your confidence. Make you feel like you made a mistake. Get you to doubt yourself until you cave. It's working, I admitted. Only if you let it. Nina tapped her pen against the paper. Here's what I think. They're operating on incomplete information. They think you're broke and struggling. They think this tiny house is all you have. They don't know about the land. I'm not ready to tell them about the land. I'm not saying you should. I'm saying that you know something they don't, and that knowledge should make you feel powerful, not scared. You're not the struggling daughter living in a shed. You're a landowner sitting on a multi-million-dollar asset. Those are two very different people. She was right. I'd been letting them define the narrative because I'd been too afraid to assert my own. But I owned 500 acres of prime Oregon forest land. I had water rights, timber rights, and mineral rights. I had something they would never be able to afford, something they couldn't take from me no matter how many interventions they staged. So what do I do? I asked. For now. Nothing. Let them think they're winning. Let them make their plans. And in the meantime, you shore up your defenses. What kind of defenses? Legal ones. Financial ones. Make sure everything is documented and ironclad. Make sure if they try anything, you have proof of ownership so clear that there's no room for argument. You think they'd try something legal? Nina gave me a long look. Your family has money and connections. If they want to make trouble, they can. Better to be prepared. We spent the rest of the afternoon going through my documents. Nina had a background in contract law from a brief stint at a firm before she'd switched to nonprofit work. She went through my deed, my survey, my property tax records, checking for any gaps or weaknesses. This is solid, she said finally. Your grandfather's will was clear. The land came to you outright, no conditions, no shared ownership. As long as you keep up with property taxes and maintain clear boundaries, this is yours free and clear. What about adverse possession? I'd been reading about property law online late at night, paranoid about scenarios where someone could claim rights to land they didn't own. Not a factor. You've been paying taxes, you're actively using the property, and you have clear documentation of ownership. Nobody can claim they thought this land was abandoned or unused. What if they tried to argue that Grandpa Walter was incompetent when he wrote the will? He was evaluated by 2 different doctors before his death, both of whom declared him of sound mind. Plus his lawyer has records of multiple conversations where he explicitly stated his wishes. Your parents would have to prove actual dementia or coercion, and there's no evidence of either. I felt some of the tension in my shoulders ease. Okay, that's good. Nina closed the laptop. Now here's the real question. What do you actually want? I looked out at the forest, at the way afternoon light slanted through the Douglas firs. What do you mean? I mean, if your family suddenly backed off and left you alone, what would you do? Would you stay here forever? Would you develop the land? Would you sell it eventually? What's your actual plan? I didn't have an answer ready. I'd been so focused on defending what I had that I hadn't thought much about what I wanted to do with it. I like it here, I said slowly. I like the quiet. I like being able to walk for an hour without seeing another person. But I also know this land has value. And part of me feels guilty for just sitting on it. Guilty why? Because Grandpa Walter held on to it for 40 years. He must have had some vision for it. And I'm just using a tiny corner for my house while the rest sits empty. Maybe that was his vision. Maybe he just wanted to know it would stay wild. Maybe. But Nina was right about one thing. I needed to figure out what I wanted, not just react to what they wanted from me. I needed a plan that was mine. That evening after Nina left, I walked the property. I did this sometimes, following the deer trails that crisscrossed the forest. The land rolled gently, rising and falling over ancient hills. The southern boundary was marked by a creek that ran year-round, fed by the springs Nina had mentioned. The northern section was dense old growth, trees so tall they made me dizzy to look up at. Standing there in the fading light, I tried to imagine what my grandfather had seen when he'd bought this place. Had he imagined a cabin? A retreat? Or had he simply wanted to own a piece of the world that couldn't be developed or changed? My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from a number I didn't recognize. Cassidy, this is your cousin Troy. Your dad asked me to reach out. I work in real estate development and I'd love to talk to you about your property. There might be opportunities you haven't considered. Coffee this week? I stared at the message. Troy. Brandon's best friend growing up, now apparently part of the family pressure campaign. Real estate development. Opportunities one hadn't considered. They were escalating. I typed back a simple response. Not interested, thanks. His reply came immediately. Just a conversation. No pressure. Your family is worried about you. I turned my phone off without responding. The light was almost gone now, the forest turning blue with dusk. I made my way back to the tiny house, using the trail I'd walked so many times I could do it in the dark. Inside, I lit the small wood stove I'd installed for winter. The fire caught quickly, filling the space with warmth and the smell of burning cedar. I made tea and sat at my desk, looking out the window at nothing but trees and stars. Nina's question echoed in my mind. What do you actually want? I wanted peace. I wanted to wake up without dreading phone calls. I wanted to make choices without measuring them against anyone else's expectations. I wanted to live in this tiny house on this beautiful land and not feel like I had to justify it. But I also knew, deep in my bones, that my family wasn't going to let me have that. Not without a fight. My laptop was still open to the property records. On impulse, I opened a new search and typed in Gerald Hastings' attorney, Pinewood Junction. A website came up. Small practice, focused on property law and estate planning. The photo showed a man in his 60s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense expression. His bio mentioned 30 years of experience and a specialty in land rights disputes. I bookmarked the page. Then I opened my email and started drafting a message requesting a consultation. I didn't send it yet. Just having it written felt like a step forward, like I was preparing for something instead of just reacting. Outside, an owl called. Inside, the fire crackled. And somewhere in Portland, I was certain my family was planning their next move. But for the first time since this all started, I was planning too. The next morning I woke to 17 missed calls. 12 from my mother, 3 from Brandon, 2 from Aunt Helen. There were texts too, a barrage of messages that started concerned and escalated to accusatory. Cassidy, we need to talk. Please call me back. Your father is very upset. You can't just kick family out like that. Brandon says you're being unreasonable. We're only trying to help. This behavior is unacceptable. Call me immediately. I deleted them all without reading past the first few. Then I sent the email to Gerald Hastings and put my phone on silent. The morning was cold, frost on the grass outside. I pulled on a jacket and made coffee, watching the sun rise over the eastern ridge. There was something about mornings here that felt like a reset, like each day started clean no matter what had happened before. My email pinged. Gerald Hastings had responded already, his message brief and professional. He had an opening that afternoon if I was available. His office was in town, above the hardware store. I wrote back confirming the appointment. Then I spent the rest of the morning preparing. I printed out every document I had. The deed, the will, the survey maps, the tax records. I made copies and organized them into a folder. By the time I drove into Pinewood Junction, I felt steady. Prepared. The town was small enough that everyone knew everyone's business, and I caught a few stares as I parked on Main Street. Word had probably spread that the Brooks family was having drama. Small towns love drama. Gerald Hastings' office was exactly what I'd expected. Wood paneling, file cabinets that looked older than me, and the smell of coffee and paper. He was sitting at his desk when I arrived, reading glasses perched on his nose. Miss Brooks, he said, standing to shake my hand. His grip was firm, his manner calm. Please, sit down. Tell me what brings you in. I laid out the folder and started from the beginning. The inheritance, the tiny house, my family's reaction, the escalating pressure. He listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he sat back in his chair. Let me make sure I understand. Your family is upset that you chose to build a tiny house on property you inherited outright. They're pressuring you to sell both the house and potentially the land, though they don't seem to fully understand what you own. And now they're recruiting extended family members to join the pressure campaign. That's exactly it. He tapped his pen against the pad. Have they made any explicit threats? Legal or otherwise? Not yet. But my cousin Troy works in real estate development and he started reaching out about opportunities for the property. Gerald's expression sharpened. What kind of opportunities? I don't know. I didn't respond to his message. Smart. He leaned forward. Here's what I'm going to tell you, Miss Brooks. Your ownership of this property is absolutely solid. Your grandfather's will was clear, the deed transfer was properly executed, and you've maintained the property appropriately. No one can force you to sell, and no one can claim any rights to your land. Even if they argue that my grandfather was incompetent when he made the will? He was evaluated by doctors. I have copies of those evaluations in my files because I was his attorney. He was completely sound of mind. Any challenge on those grounds would fail immediately. I felt relief wash over me. Okay. That's good. However, he continued, that doesn't mean they won't try other tactics. If your cousin is in real estate development, he might attempt to file liens, claim easement rights, or create legal complications that would cost you time and money to resolve, even if you ultimately win. Can they do that? Anyone can file anything. Whether it holds up in court is a different question. But the process itself can be stressful and expensive. My advice is to be proactive. Make sure all your documentation is filed correctly with the county. Ensure your property taxes are current. And consider posting no trespassing signs at all access points to your land. Why no trespassing signs? Because it establishes clear boundaries and makes it harder for anyone to claim they thought they had permission to be on your property. It's a small step, but it matters if things escalate. I nodded, taking notes. What else? Document everything. Every phone call, every text message, every interaction. If this becomes a legal matter, you'll want a clear record of their behavior. That's what my friend Nina said. Your friend is smart. He smiled slightly. One more thing. If they're pressuring you to sell, there's probably a reason beyond just disapproval of your lifestyle. Do you know if any of them are in financial trouble? I hadn't considered that. I don't think so. Brandon seems to be doing well. My parents just retired, but they should be comfortable. Keep an eye on it anyway. Sometimes family pressure around property stems from financial desperation rather than genuine concern. We talked for another 30 minutes, going through scenarios and contingencies. By the time I left his office, I had a clear action plan and the beginning of a legal strategy if I needed one. I also had a bill for the consultation, which I paid on the spot. It felt good. Adult. Like I was taking myself seriously even if my family wasn't. Walking back to my truck, I passed the coffee shop where Nina and I had met. Through the window, I saw Troy sitting at a table with another man, both of them looking at something on a laptop. Troy's companion looked up and I recognized him. Brandon. They were meeting in town. Planning something. I kept walking, but my heart was racing. This wasn't just family concern anymore. This was coordination. Strategy. I got in my truck and drove home, watching the rearview mirror the whole way. The next week passed in uneasy quiet. No calls from my parents, no texts from Brandon, nothing from Aunt Helen. It felt like the calm before a storm, and I spent the time fortifying my position. I drove to the county office and verified that all my property records were current and properly filed. I ordered no trespassing signs online and spent an afternoon posting them at every access point to my land. I backed up every document to 3 different cloud services and kept hard copies in a fireproof safe I bought from the hardware store. Nina came by twice, helping me mark the property boundaries with bright orange survey tape. We walked the perimeter over 2 days, using the survey maps to ensure we had every corner marked. The land was bigger than I'd realized, stretching far beyond where I'd explored on my casual walks. This is insane, Nina said on the second day, standing on a ridge that overlooked a natural meadow. You own all of this and they think you're living in poverty. They see what they want to see. Well, when the truth comes out, it's going to be spectacular. If it comes out, I corrected. When, she insisted. Because there's no way this stays quiet forever. Not with them pushing this hard. She was probably right. But I wasn't ready yet. Every time I thought about telling them, I imagined the conversation spiraling out of control. My father demanding to know why I'd hidden it. My mother calculating how much the land was worth. Brandon asking if he could build on a corner of it. Troy showing up with development proposals. No. Better to keep it close until I knew exactly what I wanted to do. On Thursday morning, a certified letter arrived. My stomach dropped when I saw the return address. Brooks and Associates, Richard's firm. He'd sent me official correspondence on company letterhead. Inside was a single page, typed and formal. Dear Cassidy, it began, which was already wrong because my father never called me Cassidy in letters. We write to express our ongoing concern regarding your current living situation and financial decisions. As your family, we feel obligated to intervene before you make choices that could have lasting negative consequences. We strongly recommend you reconsider your position and accept our assistance in finding more suitable accommodations. Please contact us at your earliest convenience to discuss next steps. Regards, Richard Brooks. The language was deliberately cold, almost threatening. This wasn't a parent worried about a child. This was a businessman making demands. I took a photo of the letter and texted it to Nina. She called immediately. Is he serious with this? Apparently. Cass, this is escalation. He's creating a paper trail. For what? I don't know yet. But people don't send certified letters just to express concern. He's building towards something. I should call Gerald. Absolutely call Gerald. I did. Gerald asked me to scan the letter and email it to him, which I did from my phone standing in my driveway. His response came within an hour. This letter suggests they may be considering a competency challenge or attempting to establish grounds for claiming you're not maintaining the property properly. Neither claim has merit, but it shows intent. Document everything and do not respond in writing without consulting me first. A competency challenge. They were going to try to argue I wasn't capable of managing my own affairs. The idea made my blood run cold. That evening, I sat on my porch watching the sunset and trying to understand how it had come to this. How had my choice to live differently become grounds for questioning my mental capacity? How had buying land and building a home turned into evidence of instability? The answer was simple. It hadn't. But they needed a narrative that justified their interference, and incompetence was easier to argue than simply admitting they couldn't control me. My phone rang. An unknown number, but local area code. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Hello? Cassidy Brooks? A man's voice, unfamiliar, professional. Yes? My name is Daniel Wright. I'm a land appraiser working with a development group interested in properties in your area. I understand you own a significant parcel near Pinewood Junction. Would you be interested in discussing a potential sale? My heart started pounding. I'm not interested in selling. I completely understand. But we're prepared to make very competitive offers for the right properties. Could I at least send you some information? No obligation, just so you know what the land might be worth on the current market. Who gave you my number? There was a pause. I'm not at liberty to say, but your property came to our attention through standard market research. We identify undeveloped parcels and reach out to owners who might be interested in liquidating assets. It was Troy. Had to be. Or Brandon. Someone had given this appraiser my information, probably hoping I'd be tempted by a big offer. I'm not interested, I repeated. Please don't contact me again. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking. They were sending appraisers now. This wasn't just family pressure anymore. They were actively trying to create opportunities for me to sell. I forwarded the number to Gerald with a brief explanation. His response was immediate. Do not engage with any appraisers or developers. Refer all inquiries to my office. The next morning, I woke to the sound of someone on my property. Not a car, but footsteps, deliberate and close. I grabbed my phone and looked out the window. A man in business casual clothes was walking around my tiny house, taking photos with his phone. I threw on clothes and went outside. Excuse me, what are you doing? He looked up, startled. Oh, hi. Are you the owner? Yes, and you're trespassing. I'm actually with Cascade Property Group. We're doing assessments in the area. I just wanted to get some photos of the structure for our records. Your records? This is private property. You need to leave now. He held up his hands in a gesture of peace. No problem, no problem. Just doing my job. He backed toward the road where a sedan was parked, still taking photos as he went. I called the sheriff's office and reported the trespassing. The deputy who answered took my information but didn't sound particularly concerned. Did they threaten you or damage anything? No, but they were on my property without permission taking photos of my house. We'll send someone by to take a report, but without damages or threats, there's not much we can do. Make sure your no trespassing signs are clearly posted. They are. Then you've done what you can. If it happens again, call us immediately and we'll respond. I hung up feeling helpless. The system was supposed to protect property owners, but it felt like there were loopholes everywhere. Nina arrived an hour later. I'd texted her about the photographer and she'd canceled a morning meeting to come out. We found fresh tire tracks on the access road and footprints around the perimeter of my house. They're doing reconnaissance, Nina said grimly. Whoever hired that guy wants to know what you've built here and what the property looks like. But why? Because knowledge is power. They want to know what they're dealing with before they make their next move. We spent the morning installing a trail camera near the road, angled to catch anyone who approached. It was motion activated and would send alerts to my phone. It felt paranoid, but after the morning's incident, paranoia seemed reasonable. That afternoon, I drove into town to pick up supplies. In the grocery store, I ran into Mrs. Henderson, who'd been friends with my grandmother. She gave me a long look and then leaned in close. I heard your family's been talking, she said quietly. At the country club. Your mother's been telling people you're having financial troubles and living in the woods. I'm not having financial troubles. I didn't think so. But you should know what's being said. People talk, and talk spreads. I thanked her and finished my shopping in a fog. Of course they were spreading rumors. If they could control the narrative in town, they could isolate me, make it seem like I was the problem while they were the concerned family trying to help. By the time I got home, I was exhausted. Not from physical work but from the constant vigilance, the feeling that I was under siege. I made dinner and ate it watching the sun go down, trying to remember why I'd wanted to live here in the first place. The answer came as the stars emerged. Silence. Peace. The ability to breathe without performing for anyone. That was worth fighting for. My phone buzzed with an alert from the trail camera. Someone was on the access road. I opened the app and watched the video feed. A truck, moving slowly, stopping at the no trespassing sign. After a moment, it reversed and left. I couldn't see the driver's face, but the truck looked familiar. Similar to Troy's. I saved the footage and sent it to Gerald. Then I poured a glass of wine and sat on my porch in the dark, thinking. They were escalating because I wasn't cooperating. Every refusal made them push harder. The question was, how far would they go? And what would happen when they finally realized I wasn't going to bend? The answer came sooner than I expected. Friday morning, I was working at my desk when I heard vehicles. Multiple vehicles. I looked out to see my father's Lexus, Brandon's Audi, and a third car I didn't recognize. They parked in a line and 6 people got out. My parents, Brandon, Troy, Aunt Helen, and a woman in a professional suit carrying a briefcase. My stomach dropped. This was an ambush. I met them at the door. Whatever this is, I'm not interested. Richard spoke first, his voice firm but controlled. Cassidy, we need to talk. This is Margaret Chen, an attorney who specializes in family law and estate matters. We've asked her to mediate a conversation between us. I looked at the attorney. She was young, probably close to my age, with an expression that tried to be neutral but came across as skeptical. I don't need a mediator. I need you to respect my choices and leave me alone. Your choices are affecting the whole family, Patricia said. We can't just stand by and watch you ruin your life. How am I ruining my life? I'm happy, I'm healthy, I'm financially stable. What exactly am I ruining? Brandon gestured at my tiny house. This, Cass. Living in isolation in a structure that's not even up to code. It's not sustainable. It is up to code. I had it inspected and permitted properly. Troy spoke up for the first time. Look, I've been researching the area, and I think there's a real opportunity here if you're willing to consider development options. This land could be worth serious money if it's developed correctly. There it was. The real agenda. They didn't want me to sell the tiny house and buy a townhouse. They wanted access to the land itself. How do you know about the land? I asked quietly. Troy hesitated. Well, it's public record. Property boundaries and acreage are all available through the county. So you've been researching my property behind my back. We're family, Aunt Helen interjected. We're allowed to be concerned about family assets. It's not a family asset. It's my asset. My grandfather left it to me, not to all of us. The attorney, Margaret, cleared her throat. Perhaps we could all sit down and have a productive conversation about everyone's concerns. There's nothing to discuss, I said. I appreciate that you drove all the way out here, but I'm not interested in mediation or development or selling or any of it. This is my home. These are my decisions. And I'd like you all to leave. Richard's face was reddening. You're being incredibly selfish. Because I won't do what you want? Because you're sitting on resources that could benefit the whole family while you play house in the woods. The words hung in the air like poison. So that was it. They didn't think I deserved to have something they couldn't access. They thought my inheritance should be shared, redistributed to people who would use it the way they thought appropriate. Get off my property, I said. All of you. Now. We're not leaving until you hear us out, Brandon said. Yes, you are. Because if you don't leave voluntarily, I'm calling the sheriff and having you removed for trespassing. You wouldn't, Patricia gasped. Watch me. I pulled out my phone and started dialing. Margaret the attorney touched Richard's arm. Mr. Brooks, I think we should go. This approach isn't working. Richard stared at me for a long moment. I could see him calculating, deciding whether to push harder or retreat. Finally, he turned and walked back to his car. The others followed, Troy shooting me a look that was half anger, half something that might have been respect. Margaret lingered for a moment. For what it's worth, she said quietly, your property rights are solid. They can't force you to do anything. But they can make things difficult if they choose to. Why are you telling me this? Because I took this meeting thinking I'd be helping resolve a family dispute. But this isn't a dispute. This is a power play. And I don't like being used for power plays. She handed me a business card. If you need representation, call me. I work for families, not against them. Then she left too, and I was alone again. I sat down hard on my porch steps, adrenaline draining from my body. My hands were shaking. They'd brought an attorney. They'd coordinated an intervention with 6 people. They'd researched my property and made development plans without even talking to me first. This wasn't going to end. Not unless I ended it. I called Nina. When she answered, I didn't bother with pleasantries. I need to do something big, I said. Something that makes it impossible for them to keep pushing. What are you thinking? I'm thinking it's time they knew exactly what they're dealing with. All of it. The full value of what I own and why they'll never get their hands on it. Nina was quiet for a moment. Are you sure? Once you do that, there's no taking it back. I'm sure. I've been playing defense for weeks. It's time to play offense. Okay, she said. Then let's make a plan. We talked for an hour, mapping out exactly how to reveal the truth in a way that protected me while making my position crystal clear. By the time we hung up, I had a strategy. It was aggressive, maybe even nuclear, but I was done being pushed around. That evening, I started making calls. First to Gerald Hastings, explaining what I wanted to do and getting his legal blessing. Then to Vincent Park, the land developer Gerald had mentioned who might be interested in conservation easements. Then to a surveyor who could provide updated valuations. Each call felt like arming myself for battle. And maybe that's what this was. A battle for autonomy, for the right to live my life without constantly justifying it to people who would never understand. I stayed up late drafting an email. Not to my family, but to the County Planning Commission, formally requesting information on development restrictions and conservation options for my property. It was public record, which meant anyone researching my land would see the inquiry. Including Troy. I wanted them to see it. I wanted them to realize I wasn't just refusing their plans. I was making my own. When I finally climbed into my loft bed, the forest outside was deep black and full of night sounds. Somewhere an owl was hunting. Somewhere a creek was running toward the valley. And somewhere in Portland, my family was probably planning their next move. But for the first time since this started, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I was ready for it. The weekend passed quietly, almost suspiciously so. No calls, no visitors, no mysterious vehicles on the access road. The trail camera showed only deer and a coyote trotting past in the early morning. It felt like they were regrouping, planning something bigger. I used the time to meet with Vincent Park. He drove out Sunday afternoon in a muddy pickup truck that had clearly seen actual work, unlike my father's showpiece Lexus. He was in his 50s with weathered hands and a direct way of speaking that I appreciated immediately. He walked the property with me for 3 hours, asking questions about water sources, timber stands, wildlife corridors. He took notes on a worn clipboard and occasionally stopped to test the soil or examine tree trunks. "This is remarkable land," he said finally, standing on the ridge where my tiny house sat. "The biodiversity alone makes it valuable. And these old-growth stands are increasingly rare. Have you considered a conservation easement? I'm not sure what that entails." He explained. "Essentially, you would sell or donate the development rights to a land trust. The property stays in your name, you can still live on it and use it, but it can never be developed beyond what you specify. In exchange, you get significant tax benefits and the satisfaction of knowing the land will stay wild." "Would I be able to sell it later if I needed to?" "Yes, but whoever bought it would be bound by the same restrictions. It protects the land in perpetuity." The idea appealed to me more than I expected. It would mean my family's development dreams were permanently impossible. No matter what happened, the land could never be subdivided, never be turned into housing developments or strip malls. "How much are the tax benefits worth?" "Depends on the appraised value of the development rights you're giving up. For a property this size with this much potential, probably substantial. 6 figures at least, maybe more." We talked numbers and logistics. He gave me contact information for land trusts and environmental lawyers who specialized in conservation easements. By the time he left, I had a completely new vision for what I could do with my inheritance. I could protect it forever. Not just from my family, but from anyone who might want to change it. That night, I called Nina and told her about the conversation. "That's brilliant," she said. "Not only does it lock them out, but it gives you a powerful narrative. You're not just refusing to develop the land. You're protecting it for future generations. That's a lot harder to argue against." "Exactly. When are you going to tell them?" "Soon," I said. "But first, I need everything in place. I need the easement process started, the valuations complete, all the documentation ready. When I finally show them what I have, I want it to be overwhelming. I want them to see exactly how much they've underestimated me." "You're kind of scary when you're strategic," Nina said, but I could hear the smile in her voice. "I learned from the best. Years of watching my father manipulate family dynamics taught me how the game is played. The difference is you're using it to defend yourself, not control others." I hoped that was true. But I also knew that once I set this plan in motion, there would be consequences. My family wouldn't just accept defeat gracefully. They'd retaliate somehow, and I needed to be ready for that. Monday morning brought another certified letter. This time from a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a notice that my family was requesting a formal evaluation of my competency to manage my own affairs. They'd actually done it. Filed papers claiming I was mentally unfit. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the letter, feeling rage build in my chest. This was how far they were willing to go. Not just pressure, not just manipulation, but actual legal action questioning my sanity because I wouldn't obey them. I called Gerald immediately. "I received it too," he said. "They sent me a copy as your attorney of record. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Can they actually do this? They can file anything they want. Whether it goes anywhere is another matter entirely. The burden of proof is on them to show you're incompetent, and frankly, they have no evidence. You're employed, you pay your bills, you maintain your property properly. You've even consulted with attorneys and made informed decisions about your assets. No judge is going to find you incompetent based on lifestyle choices they disapprove of. So what do? We respond formally, establishing your complete competency with evidence. And then we consider a countersuit for harassment. Can we do that? Absolutely. They're using the legal system to bully you into compliance. That's actionable. The question is whether you want to escalate to that level. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to. Part of me wanted to drag every manipulation and unfair treatment into the light of a courtroom. But another part knew that would mean years of legal battles and family destruction. Let's respond to the competency claim first, I said. Then we'll decide about the rest. Smart. I'll draft a response today. After hanging up, I sat in my tiny house feeling the walls close in despite the windows showing endless forest. They'd crossed a line. This wasn't family concern anymore. This was warfare. And if they wanted war, I'd give them one they'd never forget. The competency hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. 3 weeks of waiting while my family's lawyers built their case that I was unfit to manage my own life. Gerald assured me repeatedly that it would be dismissed, but the waiting was corrosive. Every morning I woke up angry, and every night I went to bed planning. I threw myself into the conservation easement process. Vincent Park connected me with a land trust called Oregon Wild Spaces, and their director came out to assess the property. Her name was Dr. Sarah Whitman, and she moved through the forest like someone reading a language I didn't speak, pointing out native species and ecosystem indicators I'd never noticed. This is extraordinary, she said, kneeling beside a stream to examine the water clarity. You have all 3 native salmon species using this creek system. That alone makes the land ecologically significant. We spent the day marking habitat areas and old-growth stands. By evening, she'd identified enough conservation value to justify a substantial easement. The tax benefit would be significant, easily 6 figures over the next several years. More importantly, it would permanently restrict the land from development. I can fast-track this if you're willing to commit, she said. Given the ecological value, our board would approve within 2 weeks. Do it, I told her. Whatever paperwork you need, I'll sign it. She looked at me carefully. You're sure? This is permanent. Once the easement is in place, you can't undo it. Not even if you change your mind later. I'm sure. This land stays wild. That's non-negotiable. Over the next week, I signed more documents than I'd ever seen in my life. Conservation easement agreements, habitat protection clauses, restricted use covenants. Each signature felt like building a wall between my family and what they wanted. Nina helped me organize everything into a presentation. We created a folder with property valuations showing the land was worth between $4 and $5 million. Survey maps showing the full 500 acres. The conservation easement showing permanent development restrictions. Documentation of my financial stability, my business income, my complete competency. When are you going to show them? Nina asked. At the hearing. In front of a judge. I want witnesses when they realize what they've been trying to take. That's nuclear, Cass. They went nuclear first when they questioned my sanity. I'm just responding in kind. The trail camera caught Brandon twice more that week, driving slowly past the access road, stopping to look. I saved every video. Evidence of harassment, Gerald called it. Proof of a pattern. My mother called on a Tuesday evening. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Cassidy, we need to talk about this hearing. Her voice was strained, less controlled than usual. This doesn't have to go this far. You filed the competency claim. You made it go this far. We're worried about you. Can't you see that? You're isolating yourself, making decisions that don't make sense. They make perfect sense to me. Because you're not thinking clearly. Please, just consider selling that place and moving closer to family. We could help you find something nice. Something appropriate. There was that word again. Appropriate. As if my life needed their approval to be valid. Mom, I'm not selling. I'm not moving. And I'm especially not doing either of those things because you're trying to legally declare me incompetent. Do you understand how insulting that is? It's not meant to be insulting. It's meant to protect you. From what? From being happy? From living the way I want? From making mistakes you'll regret. The only mistake I've made is letting you think you have any say in my choices. She was quiet for a moment. Then her voice changed, becoming colder. Your father warned me you'd be difficult about this. I told him to give you more credit, but I see now he was right. Right about what? That you've always been stubborn to the point of self-destruction. Even as a child, you couldn't just accept guidance. You always had to do things your way, even when it hurt you. Is that what you think? That I'm being stubborn? I think you're being foolish. And I think when you're older and alone in that ridiculous house, you'll realize we were trying to help. She hung up before I could respond. I sat there holding the phone, feeling something crack inside my chest. Not sadness exactly, but a kind of grief for the relationship I'd wanted and would never have. A mother who celebrated my independence instead of punishing it. A family who saw my choices as valid even when they were different. But that family didn't exist. The family I had saw my autonomy as defiance and my happiness as evidence of poor judgment. 2 days before the hearing, Gerald called with news. Your family has added an additional claim to their filing. They're now alleging that you obtained the property through undue influence over your grandfather. What does that mean? It means they're claiming you manipulated your grandfather into leaving you the land. That he wouldn't have done it if you hadn't coerced him somehow. That's insane. I barely saw him the last few years of his life. I was working in Seattle most of that time. I know. And the timeline alone disproves their claim. Your grandfather updated his will 4 years before his death, when he was in perfect health and you were living out of state. There's no possible way you could have influenced him. So why add it? Because they're desperate. The competency claim is weak, they know it, so they're throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. It won't work, but it does show how far they're willing to go. I sat with that information, feeling it settle like stones in my stomach. They weren't just questioning my judgment. They were questioning my integrity, suggesting I'd manipulated an old man for money. The accusation was so far from reality it would have been funny if it wasn't so vicious. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I kept running through scenarios, imagining how it would play out. My family's lawyer presenting their case. Gerald presenting mine. The moment when the judge saw the property valuations and conservation easement and realized this wasn't about a struggling daughter living in poverty. This was about a landowner protecting a multi-million-dollar asset. At 3 a.m, I gave up on sleep and made coffee. I sat on my porch in the dark, listening to the forest wake up around me. An elk bugled in the distance. Closer, smaller sounds of rodents and birds beginning their day. This place had given me peace when I'd needed it most. After years of corporate jobs I hated and family expectations I couldn't meet, I'd come here and found silence. Space to think. Permission to just exist without performing for anyone. If they took this from me, I didn't know who I'd be. But they weren't going to take it. I wouldn't let them. The hearing was set for 10 a.m. at the Timber County Courthouse. I arrived at 9:30 with Gerald, both of us carrying briefcases full of documentation. My family was already there, clustered in the hallway. Richard in a suit that probably cost more than my truck. Patricia in pearls and a dress that screamed country club. Brandon looking uncomfortable in business formal. Troy standing slightly apart, scrolling through his phone. They saw me and the conversation stopped. Patricia's face did something complicated, cycling through emotions too fast to identify. Richard just stared, his expression unreadable. "We should talk before this starts," he said. "There's nothing to talk about. Cassidy, please. We can still resolve this privately. You don't want this to become public record. You should have thought of that before you filed a competency claim." Their attorney appeared, the same Margaret Chen who'd come to my property. She nodded to Gerald professionally and then approached me. Miss Brooks, I'm required to tell you that my clients are willing to drop all claims if you agree to certain conditions. What conditions? That you sell the tiny house structure and invest the proceeds in a traditional residence approved by your family. That you allow your father to act as financial advisor on property decisions. And that you grant your brother first right of refusal on any future land sales. So complete surrender. That's the offer. My clients prefer to frame it as collaborative family planning. Tell your clients no. We'll see them in the courtroom. Her expression remained neutral, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. Respect maybe, or recognition of a fight she knew she'd lose. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, wood-paneled and formal. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Henderson, no relation to Mrs. Henderson from the grocery store but with the same direct gaze that suggested she didn't tolerate nonsense. We rose when she entered. She reviewed the filings briefly, then looked up. This is a petition for competency evaluation filed by the family of Miss Cassidy Brooks. The petitioners claim Miss Brooks is not capable of managing her own affairs and request court-ordered psychiatric evaluation and possible appointment of a conservator. Miss Brooks contests this claim. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, both attorneys said simultaneously. Very well. Mr. Brooks, your attorney may present your case. Margaret stood and launched into her argument. She painted a picture of me as isolated, making impulsive decisions, refusing family guidance, living in substandard conditions. She introduced photos of my tiny house that made it look smaller and more ramshackle than it was, shot from unflattering angles. The court will note that Miss Brooks has chosen to live in a structure of less than 400 square feet with minimal amenities, rejecting more suitable housing options. She has cut off communication with concerned family members and has refused all attempts at intervention. Gerald rose for cross-examination. Counselor, is it illegal to live in a tiny house? No, but it demonstrates poor judgment when other options are available. Is it illegal to prefer solitude? Of course not. Is it illegal to make independent financial decisions without family approval? Margaret hesitated. No. So what exactly is illegal or incompetent about Miss Brooks' behavior? It's the pattern, Margaret said. The totality of choices that suggest someone not thinking clearly. Judge Henderson leaned forward. Counselor, I've seen the photos of this tiny house. It appears well maintained and properly constructed. Do you have evidence it's not up to code? We have concerns about long-term viability. That's not what I asked. Is it up to code or not? Margaret checked her notes. We have not conducted an official inspection. So you don't actually know if there are code violations. We believe the lifestyle itself is evidence of impaired judgment. The judge sat back, her expression skeptical. Continue. Richard was called to testify. He spoke about my childhood, about how I'd always been headstrong and resistant to guidance. He talked about the inheritance and how he'd expected me to invest it wisely, but instead I'd bought an impractical structure and isolated myself. She refuses all reasonable advice, he said. She won't consider that we might know better given our experience and age. Gerald stood for cross-examination. Mr. Brooks, how much is your daughter's property worth? Richard blinked. The tiny house? I'm not sure. Perhaps 30 or 40,000. I'm not asking about the structure. I'm asking about the land itself. I don't see how that's relevant. Gerald walked to our table and picked up a document. I have here a professional appraisal conducted by a licensed assessor. According to this appraisal, Miss Brooks owns 500 acres of land valued at approximately $4.8 million. Were you aware of this? The courtroom went silent. Richard's face drained of color. Patricia made a small sound, quickly stifled. Brandon actually stood up before sitting back down heavily. I'll repeat the question, Mr. Brooks. Were you aware your daughter owns property worth nearly $5 million? I knew she inherited land, Richard said weakly. I wasn't aware of the extent. So when you filed a claim suggesting she's incompetent to manage her affairs, you didn't actually know what affairs she was managing? We were concerned about the living situation. The living situation where she owns 500 acres of prime Oregon forest land worth millions of dollars, lives debt-free, and runs a successful business from home? That living situation? Margaret objected. Your Honor, the value of the land doesn't negate concerns about lifestyle choices. Actually, Counselor, it does, Judge Henderson said dryly. It suggests Miss Brooks has made some very competent financial decisions. Mr. Hastings, please continue. Gerald introduced document after document. My business tax returns showing steady income. My credit report showing no debt and excellent payment history. Letters from neighbors and business associates attesting to my competence. The conservation easement showing thoughtful long-term planning. Then he called Dr. Whitman from Oregon Wild Spaces. She explained the easement process and the ecological value of my land. The court should know that Miss Brooks didn't just agree to protect this land. She initiated the conversation. She researched conservation options, consulted with experts, and made an informed decision to preserve 500 acres in perpetuity. This is not the behavior of someone with impaired judgment. This is sophisticated estate planning with significant environmental and financial benefits. Patricia was crying quietly. Not sad tears, but angry ones. She kept whispering to Richard, who looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last hour. Brandon had his head in his hands. Troy had left the courtroom entirely. When Gerald finished presenting our case, Judge Henderson didn't even call for a recess. She looked directly at Richard and Patricia. I'm going to be very clear. This petition is without merit. Miss Brooks has demonstrated complete competency in managing substantial assets. She has made informed decisions about her property, sought professional advice when needed, and shown fiscal responsibility. The fact that her lifestyle choices don't align with your preferences is not grounds for declaring her incompetent. But Your Honor, Richard started. I'm not finished. The judge's voice was sharp. What I see here is a family attempting to use the legal system to control an adult woman's choices because they don't approve of them. This is an abuse of the competency evaluation process, and I'm frankly appalled it got this far. She shuffled papers. Not only am I denying this petition, I'm ordering the petitioners to pay all of Miss Brooks' legal fees and court costs. Furthermore, I'm issuing a restraining order prohibiting any member of the Brooks family from filing future legal claims related to Miss Brooks' property or competency without substantial new evidence and court approval. Richard stood. Your Honor, if we could just explain. Sit down, Mr. Brooks. You've explained quite enough. This hearing is concluded. The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the small courtroom. We stood as the judge left. The moment she was gone, Richard turned to me. His face was red, his hands shaking. You lied to us. You let us think you were struggling when you were sitting on millions. I didn't lie about anything. You assumed. You saw what you wanted to see and used it to justify trying to control me. This isn't over, he said. Actually, it is. The judge was very clear about future filings. I'm not talking about courts. I'm talking about this family. What you've done here today, the embarrassment you've caused, there's no coming back from this. I didn't cause this embarrassment, Dad. You did when you filed a baseless competency claim. I just defended myself. Patricia grabbed Richard's arm. We're leaving. Come on. They fled the courtroom, Brandon trailing behind. He paused at the door and looked back at me. For just a moment, I thought I saw something other than anger in his face. Maybe recognition that he'd backed the wrong side. Then he was gone. Margaret Chin approached, her briefcase already packed. For what it's worth, I tried to tell them this would backfire. They wouldn't listen. They never do, I said. She handed me her card. If you need anything in the future, particularly with family boundary issues, call me. I don't like seeing the legal system weaponized like this. After she left, Gerald and I stood in the empty courtroom. He was smiling, the first time I'd seen him look genuinely pleased. That went better than I expected, he said. Better than I hoped, I admitted. They can't touch your property now. The restraining order sees to that. And the fee award will sting. I made sure to document every hour generously. Good. They should feel it. We walked out into bright spring sunshine. On the courthouse steps, Nina was waiting. She'd taken the morning off to be there in case I needed her. How'd it go? She asked, though she must have read it on my face. Complete victory. They know about the land now. They know about the easement. And they know they can't do anything about it. Nina grabbed me in a hug so fierce it hurt. I'm so proud of you. I hugged her back, feeling tears start for the first time since this whole thing began. Not sad tears, but release. Months of pressure finally lifting. We stood there on the courthouse steps, and I looked out at Pinewood Junction. The small town where people had been gossiping about the Brooks family drama. Where my mother had been spreading rumors about my financial troubles. Where everyone thought they knew the story. But they didn't know anything. And now, neither did my family. They'd spent weeks planning how to rescue me from my poor choices, never realizing I didn't need rescuing. I needed them to leave me alone. That evening, I drove back to my tiny house as the sun was setting. The access road had never looked more beautiful, the way the light filtered through the trees. When I pulled up to my home, compact and perfect and completely paid for, sitting on land worth millions, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. I made dinner and ate on my porch. The stars came out, brilliant without light pollution. An owl called from the old growth stand to the south. The creek murmured in the distance. My phone buzzed once. A text from a number I didn't recognize. This is Margaret Chen. Thought you should know your family is planning to contest the ruling. They're looking for grounds to appeal. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I typed back. Let them try. They'll lose again. Because that was the truth. They could file appeals, they could hire expensive lawyers, they could make all the noise they wanted. But the law was clear, the facts were documented, and I had protected what mattered. The land would stay wild. The tiny house would stay mine. And my family would have to find someone else to control. I deleted the message and put my phone away. Tomorrow I'd worry about appeals and next moves. Tonight, I was going to sit on my porch and count stars and remember why I'd chosen this life in the first place. Not because it was impressive or appropriate or what anyone expected. But because it was mine. And that was enough. 3 months passed before I heard from them again. 3 months of silence so complete it felt deliberate, like they were coordinating even their absence. The conservation easement was finalized, the land officially protected in perpetuity. Oregon Wild Spaces installed educational signage at the property entrance, and Dr. Whitman brought biology students out twice to study the salmon habitat. I expanded my tiny house slightly, adding a small office pod that gave me room to work without feeling cramped. Nina helped me build it over a weekend, and we celebrated with wine on the porch as the sun set over land that would never be developed. The letter came on a Tuesday. Not certified this time, just a standard envelope with my mother's handwriting. Inside was a single page, handwritten on her personal stationery. Cassidy, it began. I've had time to think about what happened at the courthouse. Your father won't admit this, but we were wrong to push so hard. We thought we were helping, but we were really trying to force you into a life that made sense to us. I'm writing to say I'm sorry. Not for caring, but for how we showed it. I hope someday we can talk again. Your mother. I read it 3 times, looking for the catch, the hidden demand, the conditions attached to the apology. But there was nothing. Just an acknowledgement of wrongdoing and a hope for future reconciliation. I set the letter on my desk and looked out at the forest. Part of me wanted to write back immediately, to accept the olive branch and rebuild something. But another part, the part that had spent months fighting for autonomy, knew better than to rush. Forgiveness wasn't something they could demand. It was something I'd offer when I was ready, if I was ready. A week later, Brandon called. I let it go to voicemail at first, then listened to the message while sitting on my porch. Hey Cass, it's me. Look, I know things got ugly. Dad's still angry, probably will be for a while. But I wanted to say I get it now. What you did, protecting the land like that. It took guts. And I'm sorry I didn't see what you were building here. Call me if you want. No pressure. His voice sounded different. Less certain, more genuine. I saved the message but didn't call back yet. That evening, Nina came by with takeout and we ate watching the stars emerge. So what are you going to do about your family? She asked. I don't know yet. Part of me wants to let them back in. Part of me knows it'll never be the same. Maybe it shouldn't be the same. Maybe it should be better. On your terms this time. She was right. If there was going to be a relationship with my family going forward, it would have to be built on respect for my choices, not tolerance of them. They'd have to accept that I wasn't living wrong, just differently. 2 weeks after that, I drove to Portland. Not to my parents' house, but to a coffee shop downtown where I'd agreed to meet Brandon. He was already there when I arrived, looking uncomfortable in jeans and a jacket, like he didn't quite know how to dress for reconciliation. Thanks for coming, he said as I sat down. We talked for an hour. He apologized for backing Dad's plan, admitted he'd been jealous of the inheritance even though he'd gotten plenty himself. He confessed that his perfect life in Heritage Hills felt hollow sometimes, all performance and no substance. I watch you living in that tiny house and I think you figured out something I'm still missing, he said. You know what makes you happy. I'm still trying to impress people who don't matter. It's not too late to change that. Maybe. He stirred his coffee absently. Mom wants to see you. Dad's not ready yet, but Mom is. I'll think about it. We parted with a careful hug, the kind that acknowledged we weren't fully repaired but were willing to try. A month later, I met my mother for lunch. She cried when she saw me, reached across the table to hold my hands. We didn't talk about the lawsuit or the things that were said. Instead, we talked about the land, about the conservation work, about the life I was building. I'm proud of you, she said finally. I should have said that first instead of last, but I'm saying it now. I'm proud. It wasn't everything. It didn't erase the months of pressure or the competency hearing or the years before that when my choices were always measured against Brandon's. But it was something. A beginning maybe, or at least not an ending. My father never apologized. We passed each other once at a family funeral 6 months later and he nodded stiffly before walking away. Some rifts don't heal, and I'd made peace with that. The tiny house became more than just my home. It became proof that you could choose differently and survive. That family approval wasn't required for a good life. That 400 square feet on 500 acres was worth more than any McMansion bought on credit to impress strangers. I still wake up to fog rolling through the Douglas firs. Still drink my coffee watching deer move through the understory. Still feel grateful every single morning that I fought for this space to breathe. People ask sometimes if I regret how it all played out. If I wish I'd handled it differently, avoided the confrontation, found a compromise. The answer is no. Because compromise would have meant giving up pieces of myself to keep the peace. And I'd spent too many years doing exactly that. Now I live on my terms, in a home I built, on land I protected, with peace I earned. And that's worth every uncomfortable conversation, every court appearance, every moment of standing alone against people who thought they knew better. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply refuse to apologize for being happy. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.